Margaret texted me at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning. 3 words. I hit it. I knew what she meant. I've been watching her crawl toward this number for almost a decade, ever since she went from $80,000 to her first $250,000, the slow, boring way. She'd just refreshed her brokerage app at her desk, and the total had crossed 7 figures for the first time in her life. She's 45, an office manager in suburban Ohio, divorced once, raises a teenager, drives a 2017 Toyota Highlander she paid off 3 years ago. She didn't get there from a windfall or a startup exit. She got there from 12 years of automatic contributions to an index fund, and not flinching when the market dropped. I drove over after work and sat with her on her back porch. She poured iced tea. She was glowing, the way people glow when they've just confirmed something they were starting to doubt was real. Then, I had to be the person who tells her the next 12 months are the most financially dangerous of her life. Plenty of people who cross $1 million don't end up wealthier 10 years later. They end up flat, or even slightly worse, even though the math should be carrying them forward effortlessly. The reason isn't markets. Markets reward people sitting in chairs. The reason is that almost every habit and instinct that helped Margaret get to $1 million quietly becomes the thing that drags her back below it. The discipline that built the pile is not the discipline that protects it. Almost nobody is taught the second kind. So most people learn it the way I learned it, by losing some of the pile. I'm Tom. I hit my first million at 33. I made 4 of the 5 mistakes I'm about to walk you through. The only reason I got back on track is the 5th move, which I'll get to at the end. This channel is real personal finance for normal people, not the get-rich-quick version. If that's what you want, hit subscribe. What follows is the conversation I had with Margaret on her back porch that evening, broken into the 5 things she needed to do before any of the celebration dust settled. Move 1. Freeze your burn rate. The first thing I told Margaret was that her monthly spending number, whatever it currently is, was now sacred. Not flexible, not open to adjustment. Frozen, with one exception we'll get to. Here's why this one matters more than any other move on the list. The math at the 4% rule says her $1 million can support about $40,000 of annual spending forever without depleting. Her current household spending is around $58,000 a year, which means today she's actually still working for a living because her portfolio can't yet quite cover her life. She's close, but not there. Now imagine she does what almost everyone does in their first year above 7 figures. She finances a $25,000 kitchen renovation that adds about $5,000 a year to her budget across the payback window. By summer, the Highlander has been traded in for a new SUV with a payment of $620 a month, another $7,400 a year. By fall, the dinner out budget has quietly tripled, and the family vacation has gone from drive to the coast to a flight. None of those decisions feel reckless. Each one feels earned. Together, they push her annual spending from $58,000 to $82,000 a year. At the 4% rule, $82,000 of annual spending requires roughly $2 million of portfolio. Not 1, 2. That lifestyle bump, which took her 6 months to absorb, just doubled the size of the portfolio she actually needs to be financially free. Her $1 million, the one she worked 12 years for, is in real terms half as useful as it was the day before she upgraded. David has a name for the fix. He calls it the ratchet rule, and gave it to me the year I hit my first million. Margaret's monthly spending number gets locked in writing. The only allowable increases are inflation, capped at 3% per year, plus any genuine cost of life changes, like her kid going to college. Anything else has to wait 2 full years. The 2-year delay isn't moral. It's just long enough for the dopamine of hitting $1 million to wear off. Most lifestyle upgrades that feel essential the week you hit your number feel unnecessary 24 months later. Expensive ones get reconsidered. Genuinely essential ones survive. This isn't about never upgrading. It's about making every upgrade earn its place by waiting. Margaret pulled out her phone and wrote the number $58,000 in a note app. She set a calendar reminder for 2 years from that day. That was move 1. Move 2. Buy the cheapest insurance you'll ever own. The second thing I asked her was whether she had personal umbrella liability insurance. She looked at me blankly. She'd never heard of it. Personal umbrella insurance is extra liability coverage that sits on top of your homeowners and auto policies. It kicks in when somebody sues you for more than your underlying policies cover. According to NerdWallet's 2026 data, citing ACE Private Risk Services, the average $1 million umbrella policy costs about $380 a year, around $32 a month. For that, you get $1 million of legal protection against the day something goes wrong that isn't your fault, but happens on your watch. Margaret asked why she'd suddenly need this when she hadn't needed it last week. I told her the same thing my neighbor David told me the year I hit my first million. The moment your net worth crosses 7 figures, you become legally interesting in a way you weren't before. A teenager backs into your car in a parking lot. No big deal at $300,000 of net worth. That same accident at $1.2 million, if it produces a serious injury and a lawsuit goes badly, can take a piece of every account you own. Your 401k is largely shielded from creditors under federal ERISA law. Your IRA has partial protection that varies by state. Taxable brokerage isn't protected. Home equity above your state's homestead exemption isn't. Future wages aren't. You don't have to have done anything wrong. You just have to have been the unluckiest party in a car accident, a dog bite, a contractor's fall off your roof, or a neighbor's kid getting hurt in your yard. Median jury verdicts in serious injury cases have risen sharply over the last decade, with some now exceeding 8 figures. The first $1 million of umbrella coverage is the cheapest dollar of liability insurance you can ever buy, because the carriers know that very few people actually hit the catastrophic end of the curve. The cost is built around the average, not your specific risk. Margaret called her insurance agent the next morning. She got quoted $410 a year for a $2 million policy. She sent me a screenshot. That was move 2. Total time invested, 22 minutes. Move 3. Build the buffer that looks wrong. The third move is the one almost nobody who hits $1 million does, because it feels like a mistake. I told Margaret to move 18 months of her annual spending, around $90,000, into a short-duration bond fund or a high-yield savings account, and to leave it there. Her instinct was correct in the abstract. Tom, that's $90,000 not earning the 10% the market earns. That's bad for compounding. She's right that it earns less. She's wrong that it's bad for compounding. The 18-month cash buffer at $1 million isn't there to grow. It's there to protect the rest of the pile from a specific risk most personal finance content never names: sequence of returns risk. Here's what it means. The S&P 500 has gone through 27 bear markets since 1928, roughly one every 3.5 years, with an average peak-to-trough drop of around 35%. If Margaret had her $1 million fully invested when one of these hits in the next decade, her portfolio could drop to $650,000 on paper. Not a real loss, just a paper one, as long as she doesn't sell. The problem is that her bills don't stop during a bear market. If she has to sell shares in the middle of a 35% drawdown to cover her annual expenses, she's locking in real losses that the eventual recovery can't undo. Shares she sold at the bottom never come back. An 18-month buffer lets her ride out the worst of the average bear market without selling a single share. S&P bear markets since 1950 have averaged about 11 months from peak to trough, and another year or so to start recovering. Her buffer covers her through the heart of the storm. Meanwhile, the rest of her portfolio stays compounded, untouched, and recovers with the market over the years that follow. This move feels wrong because every chart you've ever seen on YouTube says cash is trash. Cash is trash if you're accumulating. Cash is insurance if you're protecting. At $1 million, you're crossing from one mode to the other, even if you're still working. The buffer is the thing that lets you keep working without panic and keep your portfolio intact when the market does what it always does eventually. Margaret will give up a few $1,000s a year of theoretical growth on that $90,000. She might save hundreds of thousands in locked-in losses across her remaining working life. That's the trade. Move 4, the 15-minute task almost nobody does. The fourth move took Margaret roughly 15 minutes. She logged into her 401k, her Roth IRA, her HSA, and her life insurance policy and updated her beneficiaries. She set them up when she first opened those accounts years ago and never touched them again. Her ex-husband was still the primary beneficiary on her 401k. Both of her parents, who have since passed away, were still listed on her Roth. The contingent on her life insurance was a sister she hasn't spoken to in 7 years. None of that mattered when these accounts held $40,000. With $1 million spread across them, the wrong beneficiary designation can route hundreds of thousands of dollars through probate to people you didn't intend in a way no will can override. Retirement account beneficiary designations supersede a will in every state. The fix is genuinely 15 minutes. Each account has a beneficiary section in its online settings. You enter the names, the percentages, and the relationships, hit submit, and take a screenshot for your records. The whole exercise costs nothing and protects more dollars per minute of effort than almost any move on this list. I told Margaret a story about Paul, my retired neighbor. When his father died in 2009, his father's IRA still listed Paul's mother as the sole beneficiary. His mother had passed away 6 years earlier. The contingent was a long-deceased aunt. The $340,000 in the account ended up in probate for almost 2 years, eaten by legal fees, contested by people who hadn't been in touch with the family in decades. It went to the right place eventually, mostly. Paul's exact words were, 6 figures lighter than it should have been for a 15-minute fix Dad never made. Margaret updated all 4 of her accounts before I left her porch. That was move 4. Move 5, stop telling anyone. The 5th move is the hardest of them, and the one almost everyone gets wrong. I told her to not tell anyone she'd hit $1 million. Not her parents, not her sister, not her boyfriend, not anyone at work or in the neighborhood. Just keep it to herself. The reason this is the hardest is that hitting $1 million is genuinely a big deal. You want to share it. You've earned the right to share it. The problem is what happens after you do. Money this size attracts a specific kind of friction that quietly does more damage than any market drop ever will. The first thing that happens is loan requests. Not always direct, often phrased as investments. We have this opportunity. I just need a bridge. It's a sure thing. The number of people who come out of the woodwork after a family member hits any visible threshold of wealth is staggering. Most of these requests are well-intentioned. Some are not. None of them are good for your portfolio. Money lent inside families is usually not money repaid, and the relationships rarely survive the awkwardness of asking for repayment. The second thing is unsolicited advice. Brokers, financial advisors, brothers-in-law, the guy at the gym. The moment someone knows you have real capital, you become a sales target for the entire ecosystem of people who make their living off other people's portfolios. Some of the advice is good. Most of it is good for the person giving it, not you. The simpler your portfolio is at this stage, the better you do. Adding complexity at $1 million in pursuit of diversification or alternatives or tax efficiency, is the single fastest way to underperform the boring index strategy that got you there. The third thing is resentment. The data on this is depressing but real. Friends, siblings, even spouses can subtly recalibrate their relationship with you based on what they think you have. Generosity that used to feel mutual starts to feel one-sided. Invitations dry up or change tone. The version of you that you've been your whole life starts being held to a different standard. The simplest way to keep your life what it was is to keep the number to yourself and one or two people who actually need to know, like a spouse or a CPA. Everyone else is fine continuing to assume you're the same regular person you were last week, because you are. Margaret listened to this part for a while without saying anything. Then she said, "So I just don't tell my sister." I said, "You don't tell your sister." What I did wrong. The reason I know all 5 of these isn't that I read them in a book. It's that when I hit my first million at 33, I did 4 of the 5 wrong. I locked in my spending. That part I got right, mostly because I was still living in the apartment I'd had at 28 and didn't want to move. The lifestyle ratchet that got most of my friends never got me, mostly by accident. I did not have umbrella insurance for the first year above $1 million. A guy ran a red light in my neighborhood, hit a bike rider. The bike rider sued the guy who ran the light, but the guy who ran the light had inadequate coverage, and the lawsuit started spreading to other parties involved in the intersection. I wasn't at fault. I wasn't involved in the accident either, just nearby, and named as a witness. The lawsuit eventually went away. I spent $11,000 on legal fees to make sure it did. An umbrella policy would have included legal defense coverage. Lesson learned for $11,000. I did not have a cash buffer. In 2022, the market dropped about 25% over 9 months. I needed money for a family expense that hit at the same time. I sold shares to cover it. The shares I sold at the bottom never came back, in the sense that the dollars I needed went out, and the dollars that recovered weren't mine anymore. I estimate that sale cost me about $34,000 of permanent compounding value. I did not update my beneficiaries until I was 36. For 3 years, my Roth IRA still listed an ex-girlfriend from my mid-20s as the primary beneficiary. If I died in a car accident in that window, she'd have inherited the account, and there's nothing my parents could have done about it. I caught this when reviewing my accounts for my own taxes. The fix took 10 minutes. I think about it every time I drive somewhere. The one I got right was the 5th. I never told anyone. Not my parents, not my friends. 2 people knew, my financial advisor and my CPA. I'm still glad I did that. Every once in a while, I run into someone who would have changed how they treated me if they'd known, and the relief of them not knowing is louder than any satisfaction I would have gotten from sharing. The 4 mistakes cost me close to $50,000 of compound value over the next decade. That isn't life-changing money, but it's real money, and it was avoidable. The reason I'm sitting on Margaret's porch on a Tuesday, telling her all of this, is so the same $50,000 stays in her account instead of leaking out the way mine did. Closing. Margaret called me on Friday. She had done 4 of the 5 moves already. The insurance agent had quoted her the umbrella policy, and she'd bought it that same day. Every beneficiary on every account was updated. She'd moved $90,000 into a high-yield savings account Friday morning. Her spending number was written on an index card and stuck to the refrigerator. The 5th one, she said, was already harder than the other 4 combined. Her sister had texted her about a small loan situation 2 days earlier. She hadn't responded yet. I told her that was the whole game now. Sitting still while the math does the work, and saying no to the specific things that would interrupt it. The $1 million doesn't make you free in itself. The 5 moves do, by closing the doors that would otherwise leak the money back out, one decision at a time. Most people who hit 7 figures and slip back below it don't lose it in a crash. They lose it in dribbles. A kitchen renovation here, an uninsured lawsuit there, a panicked sale during a downturn, a probate disaster, a brother-in-law's restaurant. Each one feels small in the moment. Together, they're how the snowball comes apart. If you're not yet at $1 million, this is the cheat sheet to keep when you get there. If you're already past it, this is the audit checklist to run this weekend. The 4 mistakes are reversible if you catch them early. The 5th mistake compounds the longest, so the sooner you stop talking about your number, the better. Tell me in the comments which one of the 5 you'd find hardest. I'll read every one. I'll see you in the next video.